So my name is Larry Blachut, and I'm originally from Canada, but I've lived in Alaska for 35 years now, and been heavily involved in oil and gas, more specifically in pipelining, but also in some oil field work as well, primarily from inspection, even though I did a lot of work back when I was younger as a roughneck and messed around with drilling rigs and stuff. Well, my start into the oil and gas goes back to when I was 15 years old, and I dropped out of grade 12 and I ran away from home, and I boarded a train in Edmonton. I'd been offered a job, and I boarded this train at Edmonton that was going to a place north of Lac La Biche, which is in northeastern Alberta. And the little place that I was headed to was called Fort McMurray. And we were going up there. I was going up to work on a oil well surveying crew that was trying to determine the extent of the Athabasca tar sands deposit up there. And we were working for a little oil company called Richfield Oil Company at the time. And so I traveled on this train. There was no roads at that time into this area, and got off the train and spent the next 6 months, almost 8 months, going around the wilderness as a chainman, measuring out the distances and the locations for drilling for them to go ahead and determine the extent of the tar sands. So after that, I came out and I ended up in Drayton Valley and then up in Swan Hills in Alberta, and worked as a roughneck for a while, and then decided that the drilling business was not for me. It was a little too dangerous, and it was a little too rough. So I went to work for Canadian National Telecommunications, and I became a lineman, first in Alberta, and then I worked in the Yukon. And I actually, with the Canadian National Telecommunications, we did telephone line repair from Dawson Creek to Whitehorse. And then somebody decided that Dawson City needed a landline telephone system, which they didn't have at the time. All they had was radio telephones. This was back in 1960. And so we started to build the first land telephone line from Whitehorse to Dawson City. And as part of that, I've actually walked that whole distance from pole to pole, all the way from Whitehorse to Dawson City. Had some real good adventures up there. Ended up back in Edmonton and went to work for City of Edmonton Telephone System. Became an apprentice there for a communication electrician program. Became a certified communication electrician, which the Canadian government sponsored. And then had a little falling out with the union, and which was IBEW. And so I quit and ended up going to work for a little inspection company that was doing radiography on pipelines and fabrications yards. They were bought by a company out of Houston, Texas called AMF Tuboscope. And there was a big pipeline being built in northern Texas and going from Malnikoff to Sulphur Springs. And it went across Cedar Creek Lake, which is a water supply, a reserve water supply for the city of Dallas. And so they were running this sour gas line under the lake, and they were really concerned about all the welding. And so the company I was with got the contract to do all of the radiographic inspection on the pipelines that were going under the lake. So I spent about 4 months, 5 months on this pipeline job, and we finished that. And the company, AMF Tuboscope, asked 8 of us guys from Canada if we would stay in Houston and open up an office down there. And so we did that, and I stayed there for a few years, and then I took a hiatus for a couple of years down in Mexico. I beachcombed down there for a while. Came back, and I ended up working for a company called Vetco. And Vetco stands for Ventura Tool and Die Company. And they did inspection, electromagnetic inspection on tubulars, oil field tubulars, primarily tubing and casing, but also drill pipe and sucker rods, the whole shebang. So I got back into the oil and gas at that time, spent some time in research and development, developing some ultrasonic systems, because my training and background from Canada was in ultrasonics, even though I was certified in radiography and magnetic particle, etc. So I ended up staying there. I got into partnership with a guy who owned the Ocean Corporation, which was a commercial diving school in Houston. And we happened to have a drink in the bar one night, and he was telling me about his problems on trying to get his students what he calls wet, which meant that they would graduate from the diving school, but then they would be handling hoses and stuff instead of getting into the water. And the real money for these guys was once they got wet. Once they started diving is when they made the money. So he was complaining that he couldn't get these guys into the water fast enough. And I said, well, I've got just the opposite problem. I said, I've got inspectors that have got work offshore on lay barges as well as on platforms. And I can't get people to go because there's no women, there's no booze. They're trapped on either on a lay barge or a platform for a period of time, and these guys don't want to go. So I said, maybe there's something we can do together on this. So he invited me in, and I actually set up a Texas secondary education school in his diving school. And we went ahead and started teaching the divers how to do inspection as well. And so now when the diver graduated from the dive school, he could go out offshore, and all of a sudden he's in demand because now he can do inspection on platforms and on drilling rigs. And so it really helped him out. So we worked on developing some new techniques on how we could improve inspections on offshore platforms, subsea pipelines, as well as on jack-up rigs and stuff that they were using out there, as well as semi-submersibles. And we came up with some new innovative stuff on using ultrasonics as well as magnetic particle. And of course, magnetic particle was wet magnetic particle because you were doing it underwater, but it worked the same way. So we did that for a while, and then I was approached by a friend of mine who worked for ARCO, and he was in charge of a pipe yard in Houston. And he said, Larry, can you come out and talk to me about inspection on couplings, on tubing and casing couplings? I said, sure, why? And he said, well, Alaska is having problems with tubing and casing couplings failing downhole. And he said it costs them a lot of money when they have one of these things, strings separate on them downhole. So he wanted me to develop an ultrasonic system to do this, and I said, well, that might not be the best way. So instead I found an old World War II wet fluorescent mag tank out in the West Coast, and I bought it and brought it back to Texas. And then I worked with a railroad or a locomotive engine brake switching unit and changed the tank over from electric power to battery power. And I used these electromotive or the locomotive switches to go ahead and make and break my connections because you needed something pretty heavy duty. And I mounted all this on a trailer with a tent over top of it and used a blacklight system and used the fluorescent magnetic particle system to go ahead and do this. Came up with a way to magnetize the couplings in two directions and used a non-scent kerosene that we used as a lubricant to go ahead and carry the particles so that we didn't rust the couplings and didn't have any other problems. And it was such a success that ARCO hired me at the time to go ahead and inspect all their couplings. At the time, ARCO had a mandate in place that all tubular goods headed to Alaska had to go through Houston. So it didn't matter where the pipe and couplings were coming from, the drill pipe, etc. It had to be routed through Houston, and it was inspected either by AMF tuboscope, doing some of the tubing and casing inspections, or the couplings, which I was doing all the couplings at that time. And then they finally figured out that if they could get the manufacturers of these things to do some of these types of inspections, that they didn't have to route the pipe through Houston, which was very expensive. But so I ended up selling my system to 3 different manufacturers, one in Muskogee, one in Port Catoosa in Oklahoma, and then one in Pennsylvania. And they put these systems in place themselves and inspected their couplings for themselves, reduced the number of failures, and it was a success. From that, I ended up working for a company called the Vetco Company. And part of our research program that we were doing was that we were developing our own smart pig. And it was going to be in competition to the AMF tuboscope pig. And Vetco ended up getting the contract from Alyeska Pipeline. At the time, I think it was more from either Fluor or Bechtel. But they wanted us to build a 48-inch pig that we could use up here on the pipeline. At the same time, they wanted to go ahead and see if we could build some sort of motorized system that could go inside the pipe. If they had any problems with any of the welding on the inside of the pipe, they could do some back welding. But they needed to be able to transport a welding machine in and a welder and a helper. And so we built a motorized vehicle that got nicknamed Snoopy, and it would travel miles inside the pipe with a welder and a helper on board and a welding machine, and all self-contained. And they would go ahead and go inside the pipe and travel whatever distance they needed and do their back welding. So I continued on with them. One of the other things that came up was that Alyeska wanted us to do some research into some automated welding equipment that was being developed, and they were proposing using automated welders on the construction of TAPS, of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. So they shipped pipe down from Fairbanks, and we got it in Houston. They cut it up into smaller coupons, and then started welding those coupons in Houston. Well, somebody decided that no, we needed to replicate welding conditions in Alaska in the wintertime because a lot of the construction was going to happen in the winter. So somebody rented a warehouse in Dallas, and why Dallas, I don't know. But they rented this warehouse in Dallas and built a big cold room in the middle of this warehouse. The warehouse was unair conditioned, and so in the summertime it was pretty hot in this place. They took the cold room and they dropped the temperature to 70 below in the cold room. Yeah, it was something else. And they got the coupons and the welding machines, both automated welding machines and manual, and put welders in this cold room, and they'd spend 2 to 4 hours in the cold room welding. And then my crew would come in and we would use radiography and ultrasonics, and we would inspect those welds. And from that, they decided what welding procedures they needed to use, what techniques could they use the automated welding machines, or does everything have to be manual? And from the inspection side, we worked with Kodak on, they had just developed some paper film instead of the cellulose, and we tried using the paper, we tried cellulose, we all tried all different grades of radiographic film. And from that, they decided on a certain sensitivity that they wanted, and we put all that together. Then Alyeska came back and said, okay, can you build us a dark room, an Arctic-style dark room that we could use, but we want it most modern that you could find. And so we took a 30-foot trailer. We put 2 generators on it that automatically would swap over if one of them failed. Put heating and air conditioning in this trailer. We put 2 automatic film processing machines in that could handle the 163-inch long film that was used on every weld on the pipeline, and that's thousands and thousands of welds. So put all that together and sent it to Alaska. They then asked us to build a second one. We built a second one, and I think they were only used a couple of times, and then some of the local inspection companies went ahead and had their own systems. So, but from that, I was offered to come up here on construction when they finally got approval for the pipeline. And I had not been in Texas long enough from Canada to say, I don't need to go back to the cold. And the only thing that I missed in Houston was the mountains. But I stayed in Houston. While I was there, I dated a girl for a while who happened to be the daughter of a guy named Michael Halbooty. And Halbooty was a wildcatter. And I found out after spending some time around his place that he had spent time in Alaska. He had wildcatted up here on the Kenai. Actually, he had his own company up here, incorporated in Alaska. And was not real successful, though, on some of the wells that he had drilled. Most of them were dry. So he ended up shutting down his operation here and heading back south. So that was kind of my first touch of Alaska oil and gas. So the pipeline was constructed. 2 friends of mine and myself started our own company. The 2 friends had worked on the TAPS construction. And they ended up back in Houston, and we started up a company. And this was in 1978. Started up our own company called Menza Resources. And we started up specifically because we knew they were going to build a gas line. And we wanted to be first in line to be a contractor to handle all the inspection and other peripheral stuff on the gas line. So we incorporated our company, registered it in Alaska, and had a representative up here, all set to go. Well, we're still waiting for that gas line. Then in 1988, one of my friends we'd started that company up. That company went belly up. Asked me if I would come up to Alaska and help him on a bid to inspect tank floors for Alyeska pipeline in Valdez. And I had developed an ultrasonic, multiplexed ultrasonic system for inspecting pipe and casing in Houston. And I had modified the same multiplex system to be able to inspect the tank floors. So he asked me to come up and present this to Alyeska and put in a bid. So I came up and he said, I can't afford to pay you a lot. He said, unless you're working for me. He said, so while you're developing the bid, he said, can you go ahead and act as a supervisor? We're going to go ahead and send you up to Pump 1 and working for Alyeska Pipeline on their start of their corrosion investigation program that they were doing. And there was all kinds of digs that were happening along the pipeline that the pigs had found corrosion, but they were also concerned about dead legs in the pump stations. So the crew that I was over was going pump station to pump station and was inspecting all of the dead legs with a ultrasonic system. So
what is a dead leg?
Dead leg is where you come in with a line and it's not used all the time. So you end up with residue oil in the pipe, but at the same time you get condensation and other things, and so all of a sudden you've got the starts for corrosion. And with a little bit of sulfur that was in the oil, you get sulfuric acid, and so you can start eating through these pipe fairly quickly. So they're really concerned about these areas where the oil wasn't flowing all the time. If the oil was flowing all the time, it kept it pretty clean. Like the inside of that 800 miles of pipe, you'll find virtually no corrosion on the inside at all. It is slick and just looks as good as it did when it was brand new. All the corrosion that they have found was on the outside, coming from water or where I ended up working on the Adigan reroute project, where they replaced 8.5 miles of the mainline pipe north of Adigan Pass. And the pipe up there was buried in the Adigan River. And when the pipe was laid, it was done with the traditional style of wrapping with tar and paper. And in the Adigan River, part of what was happening was that the Adigan River started washing away some of the substrate around the pipe, and gravel and stuff would be scraping along and would work through the coating that they had on, and now you've got bare metal and you got corrosion. And so they had so much corrosion in that area that they said it's going to be cheaper to go ahead and replace 8.5 miles than it is to go ahead and dig every spot where there's corrosion and sleeve it. So they had done quite a few sleeves, but they found this was the better way. So I ended up being the head of quality for this Adigan reroute project. And for almost 3 years, from design to actual completion of the project, we worked on trying to go ahead and come up with the best type of coating, the best type of burial, where does it go. The mandate from the government on the grant and lease is that when the pipeline is no longer used, it's supposed to be removed and the terrain returned to its natural state. We managed to get approval from the state and federal representatives to leave the 8.5 miles that we were going to replace, to leave it in the ground. So we abandoned it in place, but we had to cap it off on each end, and then we filled it with nitrogen so that anything inside the pipe could not get out if there was any oil, even though we had cleaned it multiple times. I still remember a JPO, a Joint Pipeline Office representative, crawling in the pipe with a white glove and running his finger around the inside to see if we got all the oil off or not. And it came out pretty clean. So we ended up with replacing that 8.5 miles. But from that, I was a contractor to Alyeska Pipeline. I wasn't an employee. And my contract ran up, and I went to work for a company called ABB Amdata. And we had sophisticated inspection equipment, and I spent a lot of time out on the platforms in Cook Inlet doing inspection with this specialized equipment. I even got an opportunity to spend some time on the king salmon after the superstructure on the king salmon burnt. That was back in, I don't know what it was, 86 or 87. And so they were going to go ahead and examine what was left of the structure on the king salmon, make sure that it was structurally sound enough to go ahead and put a new superstructure on it and start it back up again. And so I spent a lot of time out there crawling around on girders and on up and down some of the legs and other areas that were affected by the heat from the fire, and ascertaining whether it was structurally sound. And so that was interesting. And then I also spent time on the monopod, the grayling, and a couple other ones as well, doing inspections on tubular goods as well as on some of the equipment, some of the vessels and stuff on board each of these platforms. So from that, I ended up getting called back by Alyeska to do some work, and that was Hannigan project. And my project manager at the time, a guy named Steve Newcomer, which he was doing some innovative stuff on this project. He called in all the suppliers and had meetings with them, flew people out to the location, actually had engineers and everything fly down to Houston for meetings with the shipping company. He also had a lot of different people involved from the pipe manufacturing, which was done in Italy, coating, which was done in Saudi Arabia, and then the shipping company. And all this was while the Gulf War was just starting. And so one of the things that we were doing was that we started working on the project in the winter, and we had to blast the ditch because it was frozen solid. And the first thing we ran into was that the scarcity of explosives in the U.S. was real low because of the Gulf War. Had a lot of stuff going on there. But it paid off because, for example, one of the ships hauling pipe over from Saudi Arabia after it had been coated ran into a storm in the Mediterranean. And normally they would have just kept on going, but they were so concerned with this cargo that they were carrying of pipe that they pulled into a sheltered harbor and weathered out the storm before they went ahead and continued on their journey. So a lot of the things that this Steve Newcomer did were really something else. We had people in the union laborers that were requesting to work on the project because everybody was talking about how good of a project it was to work on. And it really was. It ended up winning the Project of the Year from the American Society of of mechanical engineering. And so it really did a lot. It was a 3-year project, and it came in under budget and came in on schedule. So it was really something. So again, from that, I was hired on by Alyeska Pipeline by my boss, Steve Newcomer, and worked in the quality control department as a supervisor for them for, quite a few years. But then I went ahead and I got transferred. Well, Alyeska was going through these innovative organizations. They would change out their upper executives about every 3 years because the owner companies, Alyeska is at the time was like a contractor, and it was managed by owner company representatives. So every 3 years you would end up with either somebody from BP, which in the past it was Ohio, but it would end up from BP, and they would use their philosophies and policies that BP had. And then 3 years later, you might end up with somebody from ARCO heading it up, and you would have to switch to their policies and procedures and programs. So it was kind of a mess, but so they were doing reorganizations all the time. So I stayed on with them until their 97 reorg, which was their decentralization of Alyeska. And as the people in the field called it, it was either one hand on the pipe or one toe in the water, and your ass either in Fairbanks or in Valdez. And so I'd lived in Fairbanks, had moved up there when I first came to Alaska in '88. And so my wife and I said, I'm ready to go to Valdez. My wife wasn't quite as anxious for it. But I knew that she was going to be okay after the first winter in Valdez when she asked me if I would show her how to operate the snowblower. So I knew I was in good shape then. So I stayed down in Valdez as the head of quality down there. For a short period of time, I was the head of training for Alyeska Pipeline. And then I left Alyeska Pipeline and went to work for VICO. And I was the district manager for VICO in Valdez over, I think I had like 10 engineers and half a dozen draftsmen and some designers, as well as clerical people. And I worked for a new boss named Chuck O'Donnell, who I'd worked with at Alyeska Pipeline, and he had left Alyeska Pipeline and then had been hired by VICO as a vice president. And I told him, I said, I don't like the organization down here. Can I go ahead and do a reorg? And he said, well, send me a proposal. So I sent him a proposal and said, you don't need a district manager down here. And he said, so you want to eliminate your job? And I said, yep. And he said, okay, let's do it. And he said, but you're going to have to move back to Anchorage then. So I moved back to Anchorage and worked for VICO here in Anchorage, spent time with Bill Allen and Pete Leothard and some of the other executives, and stayed on with them. And I was the transition liaison between CH2M Hill and VICO when CH2M Hill bought VICO. In the meantime, I had been quality manager, so I spent a lot of time up on the slope with VICO. Had a large operation up there to support ARCO and BP, as well as Repsol and some of the other independents. And so we had a large fab shop up there, big camp, and vehicle maintenance, etc. So it was quite the operation. And then I did some of the same with CH2M Hill, except I was in charge of quality for CH2M Hill worldwide. So I spent a lot of time in outside offices as well, but kept Alaska as my home base. And stayed on with them and finally retired from CH2M Hill at the end of 2014. Still had one of my own little consulting companies that I had registered in Alaska, and ended up doing some consulting work for a construction company, a pipeline construction company in Washington, and stayed fairly active in that. But then just started finding that I had more time for golf than I did for consulting work. And besides which, by this time I found out that in retirement, I don't know how I ever found time to go to work because I've always been so busy in retirement. There's, of course, going into oil and gas, there's a lot of different entry areas. You can go into the actual oil and gas, into the drilling side, or go into the pipeline side, or you go into one of the sides that I was in, which was the inspection side. And on the inspection side, I preferred it because I get bored easy. And so one of the things that I've never been bored on is on inspection, because I was always doing something different, working for a different organization, working for a different group, different department, working for different people, and it always kept it exciting. So in the inspection world, there's a local American Society of Non-Destructive Testing that you can contact. There's training that you can take to get certifications. There's 3 different levels of certifications: level 1, level 2, level 3. And you can get into it with as little as 20 hours of training for level 1, 40 hours up into a level 2. And then level 3 is kind of the height of it, and it's more almost on a college level training program and certification. But there's companies that you can go ahead and start on. And one of the things that I loved about the oil and gas was that I got to travel a lot of places in the world. I actually was hired by a company in Oklahoma called Mustang Fuel Corporation to start up a service company. And the Mustang Fuel Corporation was, at the time, this was back in the 74, 75, they were the largest privately owned pipeline company in the U.S., I think in North America. And they were paying a lot of money for pipeline inspection, as well as inspection on some of their drilling and their processing plants. And so they wanted to go ahead and develop their own smart pig. But when they found out how expensive that was going to be, they backed away from that, and they still went ahead with setting up the company to do inspection. And we developed some innovative inspection techniques, again, equipment using ultrasonics in a lot of cases instead of using electromagnetics. And electromagnetics and radiation backscatter for wall thickness measurements. And so from that, they said that they wanted to go ahead and expand foreign. So I became the international manager, set up an international office in London, and then set up an operational office, first one in Malta, where Malta was a changeover location for drill ships in the Mediterranean, as well as American crews working in Egypt and some of the other African countries. Biggest success to me, of course, it goes back to the Adigan Reroute project. I'm so proud of having worked on that project. Uh, we had 8.5 miles. We had no real bad problems. All of our quality of the work that was done was excellent. We had oversight that we brought the government people into our meetings so that they heard our problems and our solutions to them and were involved in some of those decisions. And so I think that was the thing that I was most proud of. Of course, I was really proud of working for Alyeska Pipeline. They were an excellent company to work for. And with other than their having to change executive management, it was a great company. They finally ended up with Alyeska employee executives instead of owner company executives, which helped stabilize a lot of the stuff. You know, somebody had asked me what I thought in all the years in oil and gas, what I thought was the best thing that happened to oil and gas, or the most innovative. And to me, it was horizontal drilling. It was when I was foreign, we were in partnership with Eastman Whipstock. And Eastman Whipstock was known for their, what they call their drilling shoes that they put in at the top of the well as they were drilling. And the shoe helped move the drilling pipe directionally. But it was done very difficult. It was very difficult to do. The techniques they have now are amazing, where they can drill horizontally for great distances. It never happened, but the Liberty project that BP was trying to do on the North Slope was proposing to drill up to 5 miles offshore, where the rig would be onshore and they would be drilling into a deposit 5 miles offshore. So that was amazing. So oil and gas in Alaska, I think, is amazing. Alaska has got wonderful resources. They got great people and good companies that are working all these. So I was proud to go ahead and transport a lot of that oil that these other people were pulling up out of the ground. And it was a fun career, rewarding, and just satisfying.